Welcome to my Channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. The last text I sent my sister was a photo of mile marker 1247. Except when the search and rescue team found my phone 3 days later, that marker didn't exist. Never had, they said. The Appalachian Trail only has markers every 100 miles or so, and definitely not at 1247. But I know what I saw, I know what I photographed. And if you're listening to this right now, cozy in your bed, thinking this is just another campfire story, well, maybe it is. Or maybe you'll understand why I haven't been able to sleep properly since I got back. Maybe you'll understand why the trail maps on my wall seem to shift when I'm not looking directly at them. Before you decide whether to believe me or not, let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed how many people go missing on the Appalachian Trail each year? Not just missing, but missing in ways that don't make sense. Experienced hikers vanishing on well-marked sections. People disappearing between 2 points that should have taken 20 minutes to walk. And the ones who come back, we all tell variations of the same story. The trail changed, it moved, it kept us. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you what really happened out there. The story begins now. My name is Sarah Chen, and I used to love hiking. Used to. Past tense. 3 weeks ago, I was just another software developer from Richmond, Virginia, counting down the days until my vacation. My friend Marcus had been planning this trip for months. A 5-day section hike on the Appalachian Trail through Pennsylvania. Easy terrain, he said. Well-traveled, he promised. Nothing like the remote stretches down in Tennessee or up in Maine. Marcus and I had met at a REI workshop 2 years earlier. You know the type. Introduction to backpacking, with complimentary freeze-dried ice cream samples and 20% off coupons. He was the kind of guy who wore Patagonia to grocery shop and had probably summited more peaks than I had Netflix shows in my queue. But he was patient with beginners, never condescending, and had this infectious enthusiasm about the outdoors that made you want to buy hiking boots even if you lived in Manhattan. "Sarah, trust me," he'd said over beers at our local brewery in Carytown. "This section is perfect for getting your trail legs. Pine Grove Furnace to Duncannon, 43 miles of pure Pennsylvania beauty. We'll take it slow, 8 to 10 miles a day. There's even a halfway point where we can grab burgers and milkshakes." I should have paid more attention to the way the bartender's expression changed when Marcus mentioned Pine Grove Furnace. Should have noticed how she suddenly got very busy wiping down already clean glasses. But I was too focused on the trail map Marcus had spread across the bar, his finger tracing our planned route with the confidence of someone who'd done this 100 times before. The morning we left Richmond, the weather app showed 5 days of perfect October conditions. Crisp mornings in the 50s, afternoons warming to the low 70s, 0% chance of rain. I had my pack loaded with exactly what Marcus's spreadsheet recommended, no more, no less. My new Salomon trail runners were broken in but not worn out. I'd even splurged on trekking poles after reading they reduced knee strain by 30%. The drive up Interstate 81 was gorgeous. Fall colors just starting to paint the Blue Ridge Mountains in shades of amber and rust. We stopped at a Sheetz in Chambersburg for coffee and those addictive mac and cheese bites, and I remember feeling this surge of excitement. This was it. I was becoming one of those people. The ones with the Life is Good stickers and the Subaru Outbacks. The ones who chose adventure over anxiety. We parked at Pine Grove Furnace State Park just after noon. The parking lot was surprisingly empty for a Saturday in October, peak leaf peeping season. Just Marcus's Honda CR-V, my Corolla, and a beat-up Ford Ranger with a Hike Your Own Hike bumper sticker that looked like it had been there since the 90s. The trail register at the parking lot should have been our first warning. You know those logs hikers sign, name, date, destination, expected return. The last entry was from 8 days ago. October in Pennsylvania, perfect weather, one of the most popular sections of the most famous trail in America, and nobody had signed in for over a week? Marcus shrugged it off. Probably just means they moved the register. Park Service does that sometimes to prevent vandalism. But as we adjusted our packs and took that first step onto the trail, I noticed something else. The blazes, those white painted rectangles that mark the Appalachian Trail, they seemed fresher than they should be. Too fresh. Like someone had painted them that morning. The edges were sharp, no weathering at all, and they had this subtle shine that caught the light in a way that made them almost seem to pulse. The first mile was exactly what I'd expected. Packed dirt path, occasional roots and rocks, the comforting crunch of leaves under our boots. Marcus was in front, setting an easy pace, pointing out different tree species and explaining how to identify poison ivy even after the leaves had turned. Leaves of 3, let it be, might be basic, but it saved more hikers than any other piece of trail wisdom. We passed a small creek around mile 2, and that's when I saw the first one. A trail marker. One of those wooden posts with numbers carved into them, showing mile 1247. I actually laughed when I saw it. "Hey Marcus, looks like someone's having fun with the tourists. Check out this fake mile marker." He turned back, squinting at the post. "That's weird. This section only runs from mile 1090 to 1133. Someone must be pranking. Though that's pretty elaborate for a joke." I took a photo with my phone, thinking it would be a funny story for Instagram later. #trail humor, #lost already. The photo looked normal through my screen. Just a wooden post with numbers, Marcus's red pack visible in the background, trees framing everything in that perfect outdoor photography way. We kept walking. About an hour later, we passed another marker, mile 1247, the exact same number. Marcus stopped so abruptly I almost ran into him. "Okay, that's actually weird," he said, pulling out his GPS unit. The screen showed us exactly where we should be. Mile 1092, making good time. But the marker stood there, solid and undeniable. Mile 1247. "Maybe someone's moving them?" I suggested. "Like a prank." But even as I said it, I noticed something that made my skin prickle. The wear pattern on the marker, the way the numbers were carved. It was identical to the last one. Not similar, identical. Same depth, same angle, same tiny splinter of wood hanging off the 7. Marcus was frowning at his GPS now. "This is showing we've gone 3 miles, but..." He looked back the way we'd come, then forward. "Sarah, does this section look familiar to you?" It did. The arrangement of rocks, the fallen tree we'd stepped over, the way the trail curved slightly left around a large oak. We'd passed this exact spot before, but that was impossible. We'd been walking straight, following the blazes, no side trails or intersections. "Let's keep going," Marcus said, but his voice had lost that confident tour guide quality. Sometimes trails can seem repetitive. It's just forest monotony playing tricks. We walked faster now, not quite jogging, but definitely beyond our planned comfortable pace. 20 minutes later, we reached another creek. The same creek. I recognized the pattern of stones I'd used to hop across, the muddy spot where I'd almost slipped. And beyond it, like a punchline to a joke nobody was laughing at, mile marker 1247. Marcus pulled out his phone. No signal, of course, but the GPS still worked, and according to it, we'd covered 7 miles. We should have been approaching the first shelter, should have been seeing other hikers by now. The Appalachian Trail gets thousands of through hikers every year, plus day hikers, section hikers like us, trail maintainers. On a Saturday afternoon in October, we should have passed at least a dozen people by now. But we were alone, and we kept passing mile marker 1247. "We need to turn around," I said. "Go back to the car." Marcus nodded, relief visible on his face that I'd suggested it first. We turned around, following our own footprints in the soft dirt. 10 minutes walking, 20, 30. The footprints continued, but the parking lot didn't appear. We should have been there in 15 minutes at most. And then we saw it, ahead of us, coming up on the right. Mile marker 1247. I want you to understand something. Marcus wasn't the type to panic. This was a guy who'd been caught in a whiteout on Mount Washington, who'd faced down a black bear in Shenandoah, who'd once spent an unplanned night on a ledge in Yosemite when his rappel rope got stuck. But standing there, staring at that impossible mile marker for the 4th time, I watched the color drain from his face. "This isn't..." He started, then stopped, pulled out his physical map, the paper one he always carried as backup, spread it on the ground, used his compass to orient it. "We're here," he said, pointing to a spot that should have been barely 2 miles from the parking lot. "The trail only goes 2 directions, north and south. We can't be lost." But we were, or, no, that's not quite right. We weren't lost. The trail was keeping us. I know how that sounds. Believe me, I know. 3 weeks later, sitting in my apartment in Richmond with every light on, typing this on my laptop because I need someone else to know what happened. I know how it sounds. But trails don't just loop back on themselves. Reality doesn't work that way. Except on the Appalachian Trail, sometimes it does. We tried everything logical people would try. We walked off trail, pushing through the underbrush in a straight line toward where the parking lot had to be. 20 minutes of scratched legs and torn clothes later, we emerged back on the trail, right at mile marker 1247. We tried walking backwards, eyes closed, one person leading the other. We tried splitting up for just 50 yards, always keeping visual contact. Didn't matter. Every path led back to that same damned marker. The sun was getting lower, and with it came the first real taste of fear. Not the adrenaline spike of seeing a snake on the trail or slipping on a wet rock. This was deeper, older, the kind of fear our ancestors felt when they realized they'd wandered too far from the cave. "We need to make camp," Marcus said, his voice steady but his hands shaking as he checked his watch. "It'll be dark in 2 hours. Tomorrow morning, with fresh eyes and better light, we'll figure this out." We found a flat spot just off the trail, or what we thought was just off the trail. Set up our tents with the mechanical precision of people who needed something normal to focus on. Marcus had the more expensive setup, a big Agnes ultralight that cost more than my monthly car payment. Mine was a budget Coleman from Amazon, but it had good reviews and had kept me dry during a practice night in my backyard. As we worked, I kept glancing at the trail, expecting to see other hikers. Someone who could confirm we weren't going crazy. Someone who could point us toward the parking lot and laugh at the city kids who got turned around on one of the easiest sections of the AT. But nobody came. We cooked dinner on Marcus's Jetboil stove, Mountain House beef stroganoff, that tasted like salted cardboard but provided necessary calories. The forest grew darker around us, and with the darkness came sounds. Normal sounds at first. Branches creaking, leaves rustling, the distant call of an owl. But underneath those familiar noises was something else. A rhythm. Like breathing, but too big to be any animal I knew. "Do you hear that?" I asked. Marcus was staring into the trees, his headlamp beam sweeping slowly back and forth. "It's just the wind in the canopy. Mountains create weird acoustic effects, but I could tell he heard it too, that deep, patient breathing that seemed to come from the earth itself." I crawled into my tent around 8 p.m., exhausted despite having only hiked. How far? My phone said we'd walked 12 miles, but we'd never gotten more than a few hundred yards from that marker. The battery was at 60%. I turned it off to conserve power, then lay in my sleeping bag listening. Have you ever noticed how loud a forest is at night? Every tiny sound amplified, every rustle potentially something approaching your tent. But that night, the sounds were wrong. A stick would break to my left, then the exact same sound would repeat to my right. Like an echo. But echoes don't happen in dense forest. Echoes need space, hard surfaces to bounce off. Around midnight, I know it was midnight because I'd just checked my watch, I heard Marcus unzip his tent. Sarah. His whisper was tight with fear. Sarah, are you awake? Yeah. Look outside. Look at the trail. I unzipped my tent flap just enough to peer out. The trail was glowing. Not bright, not like someone had strung LED lights or anything, but a soft phosphorescent glow, like those deep-sea creatures you see in nature documentaries. The white blazes on the trees were pulsing in slow synchronized waves, and the trail itself seemed to be breathing, rising and falling slightly like the chest of some massive, sleeping thing. What do we do? I whispered. We wait for sunrise. We don't step on that trail until we can see clearly. But even as he said it, I felt the pull. Have you ever stood at the edge of a high cliff and felt that weird urge to jump? Not because you want to die, but because some primitive part of your brain wants to know what would happen. That's what the glowing trail felt like. It wanted us to walk on it. It wanted us to follow those pulsing blazes deeper into the forest. I forced myself to zip the tent closed, to lie back down, to ignore the increasing intensity of the glow that made shadows dance on my tent walls. But sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that mile marker. 1,247. The numbers seemed important somehow, like they meant something beyond just distance, like they were coordinates to somewhere else. Dawn came slowly, gray and misty. When I finally emerged from my tent, Marcus was already up, standing at the edge of our campsite, staring at the trail. It looked normal again, just dirt and rocks and roots. The blazes were plain white paint. No glow, no breathing, no wrongness except for the memory of what we'd seen. We follow it north, he said without preamble. No matter what we see, no matter how many times we pass that marker, we keep going north. Trails can't loop forever. It's physically impossible. But the Appalachian Trail doesn't follow the rules of physics. Not always. Not when it's hungry. We packed up camp in silence, both of us moving with the careful deliberation of people who knew something was very wrong, but had to pretend otherwise to keep functioning. The forest around us looked exactly as it should. Morning mist clinging to the hollows, birds starting their dawn chorus, squirrels chattering about our intrusion into their territory. Normal, completely normal. Except for the fact that every bird sounded exactly the same, like a recording being played on repeat. Except for the fact that the squirrels all moved in perfect synchronization, heads turning to track our movement with mechanical precision. We stepped back onto the trail at 7:23 a.m. I know the exact time because I'd started documenting everything in my phone's notes app, thinking that if we disappeared, at least there'd be some record of what happened. The first thing we saw was mile marker 1,247. Of course, but this time, there was something else. A backpack, leaning against the marker. Modern, expensive, a green Osprey Atmos AG65 with trekking poles still attached. Marcus approached it slowly, like it might explode. The pack was covered in dew but otherwise looked new. He unzipped the main compartment, and we found everything you'd expect. Sleeping bag, tent, cook stove, food that hadn't expired yet. The food that was still good. There was a wallet in the hip belt pocket. The driver's license inside belonged to someone named James Patterson from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. The license had expired in 2019. "This pack isn't 5 years old," Marcus said, his voice hollow. "This model came out last year. We left the pack there. What else could we do?" But as we walked away, continuing north on the trail that somehow led everywhere and nowhere, I couldn't shake the feeling that James Patterson was still here somewhere, still walking, still trying to get past mile marker 1247. For the next 2 hours, we hiked in determined silence. We passed the marker 6 more times. Each time, the forest around it was slightly different. Sometimes the trees were thicker, sometimes thinner, sometimes there were rocks that hadn't been there before. But the marker itself never changed. Same wood, same carved numbers, same splinter hanging off the 7. It was like walking through different versions of the same place, or the same place at different times. Then we heard the voices. "Told you we should have taken the blue blaze. Compass says north but the sun. Been walking for 3 days." The voices came from ahead of us, clear and normal and human. Marcus and I both started running, crashing through the underbrush toward the sounds of other people. We burst into a small clearing and found them. 3 hikers, looking exactly as lost and frightened as we felt. There was a couple, probably in their 50s, wearing matching Columbia jackets and those zip-off pants that turn into shorts. The woman was crying silently while the man studied a GPS unit with intense concentration. The third was a younger guy, maybe 25, with a bushy trail beard and a Katahdin, or bust, t-shirt that marked him as a through hiker attempting the entire 2,190-mile trail. "Oh, thank God," the woman said when she saw us. "Please tell me you know the way out." We exchanged stories. The couple, Janet and Bill from Mechanicsburg, had been day hiking 4 days ago. Just a simple 5-mile loop they'd done dozens of times before. But the loop never ended. They'd been walking the same section of trail for 4 days, passing the same mile marker, watching their food run out, their phones die, their hope evaporate. The through hiker, who went by the trail name Cosmic, had an even stranger story. He'd been hiking northbound from Georgia, had already covered 1,100 miles over 2.5 months. 3 weeks ago, he'd entered this section of Pennsylvania, and he'd been here ever since. According to his GPS, he'd walked over 400 miles in those 3 weeks, but he was still here, still passing mile marker 1,247. "It's the trail," Cosmic said, his eyes bright with exhaustion and something else. Understanding, maybe? Or acceptance. The old-timers at the hostels, they tell stories. Most people think it's just trail mythology, hiker folklore. But they say the Appalachian Trail isn't just a path, it's alive. It's been here longer than the blazes, longer than the name, longer than humans have been walking these mountains. And sometimes, when it gets hungry, it keeps people. "That's insane," Bill said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" Cosmic pulled out a tattered notebook. "I've been keeping track. Every person I've met stuck in this loop, they all have something in common. We all took something from the trail. Nothing big, nothing that seemed important. But something." He was right. Janet had picked up an interesting rock near the beginning of their hike, planning to add it to her garden. Bill had broken off a piece of rhododendron for his wife to identify later. Marcus had pocketed an old railroad spike he'd found near Pine Grove Furnace, thinking it was a cool piece of history. I'd taken a perfectly round acorn, planning to try growing an oak tree in my apartment. "The trail wants them back," Cosmic said. "But here's the thing. I don't have anything. I've been leave no trace perfect this entire trip. Haven't taken so much as a leaf. So why am I here?" Before anyone could answer, we heard it. Footsteps on the trail, coming closer. Heavy, measured footsteps that didn't match any hiking rhythm I'd ever heard. We all turned toward the sound, and what we saw, it was a person. Sort of. They were wearing modern hiking gear. A blue Patagonia puffy jacket, ultra trail runners, a worn, hyperlight mountain gear pack. But their face was wrong. Features that didn't quite line up, like someone had described a human face to an artist who'd never seen one. Eyes that were the right shape but the wrong depth. A mouth that moved independently of the words it spoke. "Hello, hikers," it said in a voice like wind through leaves. "Are you enjoying the trail?" Nobody answered. We couldn't. There was something fundamentally wrong about this thing that wore the shape of a hiker. Something that made every instinct scream to run. But we couldn't move either, frozen like deer in headlights. "The trail appreciates your visit," it continued, taking a step closer. With each step, its appearance shifted slightly. The jacket changing from blue to green to red and back to blue. The face rearranging itself like it was trying to find the right configuration. Some visit for days, some for years, some never leave at all. The trail is generous with its time. "What are you?" Marcus managed to whisper. The thing tilted its head at an angle that necks don't bend. "I'm a hiker. Like you. I've been hiking this trail for how long has it been? Time moves differently here. I started in 1973, or was it 1993, or 2013, it doesn't matter. The trail takes care of me, feeds me, gives me purpose. I help it collect." "Collect? What?" Janet's voice was barely audible. "Stories. Memories. Moments. The trail is hungry for human experiences. Each hiker who stays becomes part of its collection. Their stories written in the roots, their memories stored in the stones, their final moments preserved forever at mile marker 1247. It reached out toward Janet, and that broke our paralysis. We ran. All 5 of us, crashing through the underbrush, not caring about direction or trails or anything except getting away from that thing that pretended to be human. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs shook, and when we finally stopped, gasping and terrified, we were standing right back at mile marker 1247. But this time we weren't alone. There were others. Dozens of them. All standing perfectly still, all wearing hiking gear from different eras. External frame packs from the 70s, neon windbreakers from the 80s, modern ultralight setups. All with those same wrong faces. All with those same impossible angles. "Welcome," they said in unison, their voices creating a harmony that made my teeth ache. "The trail has been waiting for you. I need you to understand something before I tell you how we got out. Not everyone did. That's important. The trail doesn't give up its collection easily, and the price for leaving, well, some prices are too high to pay. But some prices are exactly high enough. The things that weren't quite human circled us slowly, their movements synchronized like a school of fish or a flock of birds. Up close I could see details that made my mind want to shut down. Their clothes were perfect replicas of hiking gear, but if you looked carefully you could see the fabric was actually made of tiny pine needles woven together. Their skin had the texture of bark, smooth from a distance but rough and layered up close. And their eyes reflected not light, but memories. In them, I saw flashes of every hiker who'd ever walked this trail, thousands upon thousands of moments compressed into pupils that dilated and contracted with the rhythm of breathing earth. "The trail is generous," they spoke, still in that horrible harmony. "You can stay. Become part of the collection. Your stories will live forever in the roots and rocks. Your final hike will never end." Cosmic stepped forward and I thought he was going to fight, but instead he laughed. It was the sound of someone who'd figured out a cosmic joke that wasn't actually funny. "I know what you are," he said. "You're not hikers. You're not even people anymore. You're antibodies. The trail's immune system." The things stopped moving. All of them, frozen mid-step, heads slowly turning toward Cosmic with the mechanical precision of surveillance cameras. "The Appalachian Trail is alive," Cosmic continued, his voice gaining strength. "But it's sick. Has been for years. Too many people, too much damage, too much taken, and not enough given back. So it developed a defense mechanism. It keeps some people, absorbs them, uses their memories and experiences to try to understand what it is now, what it's becoming. But it doesn't know how to let go anymore." One of the things, wearing a vintage 1960s external frame pack, tilted its head. When it spoke, it used only its own voice, rough and strange but singular. "You know much for someone so young." "I've been reading the trail registers," Cosmic said. "The real ones, the old ones, going back to the 1920s when the trail was first being built. The disappearances follow a pattern. They spike whenever the trail undergoes major changes. New development, rerouting, heavy damage from overuse. The trail gets confused, anxious. It doesn't understand what it's supposed to be anymore. The trail must preserve itself," the thing said. "But you're killing it," Janet interrupted, surprising everyone, including herself. "Don't you see? By keeping people, by creating these loops, you're making the trail something to be feared instead of loved. Fewer people will come. The trail will be forgotten. It'll die anyway, just slower." The things seemed to consider this, their heads moving in small, bird-like jerks. Then, in unison, they spoke. "The trail requires balance. Give and take. You have taken. What will you give?" That's when Marcus figured it out. I could see it in his eyes. The sudden understanding followed immediately by resignation. "Our memories," he said quietly. "You want our memories of the trail. Not just the physical things we took, but the experiences, the joy, the challenge, the connection to nature. That's what the trail is really hungry for." The thing in the 1960s pack stepped closer. "One memory, your most precious trail memory. Give it freely and you may leave, but you will never remember it again. It will belong to the trail forever." "That's it?" Bill asked. "We just give up a memory and we can go?" "The memory must be true. It must be powerful. It must be something that changed you, and..." The thing paused. "Not all of you have such a memory. Some of you have only taken, never given, never truly connected. For you, the price is different." It was looking at Bill when it said this. Bill, who'd admitted earlier that he only hiked because Janet loved it. Who spent every trail mile checking his phone, wishing he was home watching football. Who'd never felt that spiritual connection to the wilderness that keeps people coming back despite the pain and exhaustion and danger. "What price?" Bill asked, his voice cracking. "You must stay. Become part of the trail's memory. Let it learn, through you, what it means to walk without love. To move through nature without seeing it. This, too, is part of the human experience the trail must understand." "No," Janet said immediately. "Absolutely not. There has to be another way." But Bill was already nodding, tears streaming down his face. "It's okay, Jan. I get it now. I finally get it." He looked around at the forest, really seeing it for maybe the first time. "It's beautiful here. Maybe if I stay long enough, I'll learn to love it the way you do." What happened next happened fast. Janet grabbed Bill's arm, trying to pull him away from the things. Cosmic started arguing, saying there had to be another solution. Marcus was digging through his pack, looking for something, anything that might help. And me, I was remembering the first time I'd ever hiked. Not with Marcus, not on the Appalachian Trail, but with my dad when I was 7. He'd taken me to a small trail near Pocahontas State Park, just a 2-mile loop, but to 7-year-old me, it had been an adventure into another world. I'd seen my first wild deer, found my first walking stick, learned that moss grows on all sides of trees, not just north. My dad had carried me the last half-mile when my legs gave out, and I'd fallen asleep on his shoulders, my small hand still clutching a crow feather I'd found. "I'll give it," I said, loud enough to cut through the chaos. "My memory. I'll give it freely." The things all turned to me. "Show us." I closed my eyes and let the memory flow out of me. I felt it leave, physically felt it pulled from my mind like a tooth being extracted. The image of my father's face blurred, then disappeared. The feeling of safety on his shoulders, gone. The joy of that first discovery of the wild world, erased. All that remained was a vague sense that I'd lost something important. A hollow space where something precious used to live. When I opened my eyes, one of the paths leading away from mile marker 1247 was glowing. Not the supernatural glow from the night before, but a gentle, welcoming light, like sunrise through trees. "Go," the thing in the 1960s pack said. "You have paid." The trail is satisfied. "What about the rest of us?" Marcus asked. One by one, they gave their memories. Marcus gave the moment he'd summited his first 14er in Colorado, the feeling of standing above the clouds. Janet gave her first solo hike, the empowerment of discovering she could rely on herself in the wilderness. Cosmic, tears streaming into his beard, gave the morning he'd started his through hike at Springer Mountain in Georgia, full of hope and possibility. Each memory that was given opened another glowing path. "But Bill, I don't have one," he admitted. "I don't have a precious trail memory. They're all just endurance, waiting for them to be over." The things began closing in on him, and Janet screamed, trying to shield him with her body. That's when I remembered the acorn in my pocket, the one I'd taken from the trail. Such a small thing, but it was something. "Wait," I said, pulling it out. "What if we give back what we took? What if we add something, not just return, but improve?" The things paused. I took the acorn and pressed it into the soft earth beside the trail, covering it with leaves and a prayer that it would grow. Marcus added his railroad spike, driving it deep into the ground as a permanent marker. Janet placed her rock at the base of a tree, creating a small shrine. Cosmic pulled out his journal, pages and pages of trail observations and poetry, and left it in a Ziploc bag for future hikers to find. Bill stood there, empty-handed. Then, slowly, he pulled out his phone, his expensive top-of-the-line smartphone that he'd been checking obsessively even when there was no signal. He looked at it for a long moment, then placed it on the ground. "I give my disconnection," he said. "I give my need to be anywhere but here. Take it. Learn from it. But also, let me learn too. Let me finally see what Janet sees. Just let me see it with her." The things were silent for a long moment. Then, all at once, they stepped back. The forest around us shimmered, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt, and suddenly we could see the parking lot. Our cars were right there, maybe 50 feet away, covered in pine needles but otherwise exactly as we'd left them. "Go," the thing in the 1960s pack said. "The trail is satisfied. But remember, or forget as the case may be, the Appalachian Trail is always hungry. It will always need feeding. Some feed it with joy, some with challenge, some with respect. But everyone who walks here becomes part of its memory. Choose carefully what you leave behind." We ran. All 5 of us together, not looking back. We reached our cars and fumbled for keys with shaking hands. As I started my Corolla, I looked back one more time. The trail looked normal, peaceful, a simple path through the Pennsylvania woods. But just for a moment I swear I saw them. Dozens of figures in hiking gear from across the decades, standing at the tree line, watching. Then I blinked, and they were gone. The drive home was silent. We'd exchanged numbers in the parking lot, promised to stay in touch, but I knew we wouldn't. How could we? What would we say? Hey, remember that time we got trapped in a supernatural loop on the Appalachian Trail? Except, I don't remember. Not all of it. There's a hole in my memory where something precious used to be, and sometimes I catch myself crying without knowing why. Marcus made it back to Richmond. He sold all his hiking gear the next week, took up cycling instead. Janet and Bill, they're still together, still hiking. But only day trips now, and always together, always holding hands. I heard from Cosmic once, a postcard from Katahdin. He'd finished his through hike. The postcard just said, "The trail remembers everything. Thank you for reminding me that some things are worth forgetting." Me? I kept the photo, the one of mile marker 1247. Except when I looked at it on my phone after getting home, the marker showed the correct number, 1092. The number it should have been all along. My phone's metadata says the photo was taken at 2:47 p.m. on a Saturday in October, but the timestamp must be wrong, because that would mean we were only on the trail for 3 hours, not 3 days. 3 hours. I've gone back to check the news reports from that week. No missing hikers, no search and rescue operations. According to every official record, nothing unusual happened on the Appalachian Trail in Pennsylvania that October. But sometimes, late at night, I check the trail forums. I read the trip reports, and every once in a while someone mentions it. Just a line or two, easy to miss if you're not looking for it. Weird section near Pine Grove Furnace. GPS acted strange around mile 1092. Could have sworn I passed the same marker twice. And the missing hiker reports, if you know how to read them, really read them, you'll notice something. The Appalachian Trail has one of the best safety records of any major trail system. Thousands of miles, millions of hikers, remarkably few disappearances. But the ones that do happen, they cluster. Time-wise, I mean. Every few years there's a spike, a dozen people in a month, then nothing for years. The authorities blame weather patterns, economic factors affecting hiker traffic, copycat behaviors. But I know better now. The trail gets hungry, and when it feeds deeply. 3 weeks have passed since I got back. My apartment in Richmond feels smaller now, the walls too close, the air too still. I threw away my hiking boots, donated my backpack to Goodwill, deleted all my trail apps. But I can't stop thinking about it. Can't stop wondering about that hole in my memory, that precious thing I gave away. Sometimes I call my dad, and he mentions taking me hiking as a kid, but the memory feels second-hand, like something I saw in a movie once. Last night, I had the dream again. I'm walking on a trail that glows with soft, phosphorescent light. The trees breathe in and out, their leaves whispering secrets in a language older than words. Mile marker 1247 appears again and again, but in the dream, I understand what it means. It's not a distance, it's a date, December 47. Except there is no December 47 that doesn't make sense unless time moves differently on the trail. Unless the trail exists partially outside our normal reality, touching our world at certain points but extending into places we can't fully perceive. Unless those things that look like hikers are still out there, collecting memories, preserving moments, building an archive of human experience that the trail uses to understand what it's becoming in this modern age. I woke up from the dream at 12:47 a.m. I've been awake ever since, typing this story, trying to warn you, or maybe trying to understand it myself, or maybe the trail wanted me to tell this story. Maybe this is part of what I owe. part of the exchange. I gave a memory, but I gained a story that needs to be told, needs to be shared, needs to become part of the larger memory of what the Appalachian Trail really is. Here's what I know for certain. The Appalachian Trail is 2,190 miles long. It passes through 14 states. Millions of people hike portions of it every year. And sometimes, just sometimes, it keeps people. Not forever, usually. Just long enough to feed. Long enough to remember. Long enough to ensure its own survival in a world that's rapidly forgetting what it means to be truly wild. If you're planning to hike the AT, go ahead. It's beautiful. Transformative. One of America's great treasures. But pay attention to the mile markers. If you see one that doesn't belong, if the numbers don't make sense, if you pass the same marker twice, give something back. A memory, a moment, a small offering to show respect. The trail is hungry, yes, but it's not cruel. It only takes what it needs. And sometimes what it needs is simply to be remembered, to be respected, to be understood as something more than just a path through the woods. But whatever you do, don't take anything. Not a rock, not a feather, not even a single acorn. Because the trail remembers everything. Every footstep, every breath, every small theft. And when it gets hungry enough, when it needs to feed deeply, it doesn't just want the thing you took, it wants you to become part of its collection. Forever. So tell me, after hearing all of this, do you still want to know what happened to James Patterson from Harrisburg? Do you want to know why his 2023 backpack had a license that expired in 2019? Do you want to know what happens to the hikers who can't pay the price, who don't have precious memories to give, who can only offer their endless walking on a trail that never ends? Some stories are meant to be told. Others are meant to be warnings. And some are invitations. The Appalachian Trail is out there waiting. It's always been waiting. And now that you've heard this story, now that you know what I know, you'll never be able to walk any trail the same way again. You'll always wonder if that rustling in the leaves is just wind, or if it's the trail breathing. You'll always check the mile markers twice. You'll always keep your precious memories close, just in case you need to pay a price you didn't know you owed. Sweet dreams, listener. And if you're lying in bed right now, cozy and safe, feeling that delicious thrill of fear from a story you're not quite sure is fiction, well, maybe check your pockets. Make sure you haven't accidentally brought something home from your last hike. Because the trail has a long memory, and it always collects what it's owed. The Appalachian Trail is alive. It changes to keep people lost. But more than that, it changes people. It changed me. Even with a hole in my memory where something beautiful used to live, even with the nightmares and the constant checking of mile markers in my dreams, I'm different now. I understand something fundamental about the wild places of the world. They're not ours. We're theirs. We're just visitors, passing through, leaving footprints and taking memories. Or sometimes we're the ones being collected, preserved. Kept mile marker 1,247 is still out there. I know because last week someone posted a photo of it on Reddit. Weird marker in Pennsylvania, they wrote. Must be a prank. The photo was deleted within an hour, but I saw it. I saved it. And if you look closely, really closely in the background behind the marker, you can see a figure in a blue Patagonia jacket, or maybe green, or maybe red. It's waiting. The trail is always waiting, and it's always hungry. Story number 2. The tape was wedged between my dad's old tax returns and a shoebox full of baseball cards. Black plastic case, no label, just a piece of masking tape with the date written in blue ballpoint pen. October 15th, 2024. That's next week. My hands trembled as I read it again. Next week. I almost must put it back. Almost convinced myself it was nothing. But something about the way the numbers looked, the handwriting, it was mine. I know my own handwriting, don't I? The way I make my 4s with that little gap at the top. The way my zeros lean slightly to the right. This was my handwriting, but I never wrote this. Before you think I'm crazy, before you click away, just listen. Because right now, as I'm recording this, everyone I know is getting ready for something. My mom bought a black dress yesterday. My best friend Jake canceled our weekend plans. And that tape is still sitting in my VCR. Paused at the moment where I see my own face in a coffin, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how this started. Properly. Let me tell you why I'm terrified that tomorrow might be my last day alive. All right, the story begins now. Saturday morning in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. The kind of October day where the leaves crunch under your feet and the air smells like someone's always burning wood somewhere. I was cleaning out my parents' attic. They'd asked me to help while they were visiting my sister in Denver, 28 years old and still doing chores for Mom and Dad, but that's beside the point. The attic was exactly what you'd expect. Dusty Christmas decorations, boxes of report cards, my old Nintendo 64 that probably still worked if I plugged it in. Normal stuff. Memories packed away in cardboard and plastic bins, each one labeled in my mom's perfect schoolteacher handwriting. I found the tape in a box marked Home Videos 1995 to 2000, which was weird because, well, the date on it was 2024. My first thought was that Dad had reused an old case, maybe recorded something recently, but we haven't used VHS in years. Who even has a VCR anymore? Turns out we did. Buried under a pile of quilts in the corner, covered in enough dust to make me sneeze 3 times in a row. The kind of sneeze that makes your whole body shake. I dragged it downstairs, found the old cables. You know the ones, red, white, yellow. And after about 20 minutes of fiddling with the TV inputs, I got it working. The screen flickered to life with that familiar static. Then, black. For maybe 10 seconds, just black. I almost thought the tape was blank when church bells. The sound was muffled, distant, but definitely church bells. Then the image faded in. It was our church. First Presbyterian on 3rd Street, the one with the red brick and the white steeple that you can see from basically anywhere downtown. The camera was positioned at the back of the sanctuary, capturing everything from behind the last pew. The place was packed. Packed. Every seat filled, people standing along the walls. And I recognized them, all of them. Mrs. Henderson from next door, wearing that purple hat she saves for special occasions. My college roommate Tyler, who I hadn't seen in 3 years, not since he moved to Seattle. My coworkers from the insurance office. My ex-girlfriend Sarah, sitting next to her new husband. Even Mr. Petrov, my high school chemistry teacher who I heard had retired to Florida. They were all there, all of them dressed in black. All of them with that same expression, you know the one. That funeral face, sad but trying to be respectful. Some crying quietly into tissues, others just staring straight ahead. The camera slowly zoomed in, passing over the crowd, and that's when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. They were all holding programs, funeral programs, and even though the image was a little grainy, I could see the photo on the front. It was my senior yearbook picture. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. That whoosh, whoosh sound that drowns out everything else. I wanted to turn it off. I wanted to rewind it and pretend I never saw it. But I couldn't move. I just sat there on my parents' floral print couch, the remote frozen in my hand, watching my own funeral. The camera kept moving forward slowly, like whoever was filming was walking up the center aisle. Past the Johnsons, past my Uncle Carl, Past faces I knew and faces I didn't quite recognize but seemed familiar. And then, the coffin came into view. Dark wood, polished, expensive looking. The kind my parents could never afford but would probably try to buy anyway because that's what you do, right? You give your kid the best send-off you can, even if it means taking out a loan. The lid was open. I paused the tape. My finger just hit the button on its own, like some survival instinct kicked in. I sat there for, I don't know, 5 minutes, 10, just staring at the frozen image on the screen, the edge of the coffin visible but not what was inside. Not yet. I had to know. You understand that, right? I had to see. I hit play. The camera moved closer. Closer, and then it was me, lying in that coffin. My face pale, waxy looking the way dead faces get. Wearing my navy suit, the one I bought for job interviews. My hands folded across my chest. A rosary wrapped around my fingers, which was weird because we're Presbyterian, not Catholic. But it was definitely me. The scar on my left eyebrow from when I fell off my bike in 4th grade. The way my hair does that little flip thing on the right side no matter how much gel I use. Even the tiny mole on my neck that Sarah used to say looked like a comma. The camera lingered for maybe 30 seconds. Then it panned to the left, and I saw my parents. I've never seen my dad cry. Not once in 28 years. Not when his father died. Not when the factory closed and he lost his job. Never. But on this tape, he was sobbing. Not trying to hide it or hold it back. Full-on sobbing into my mom's shoulder while she held him. Her own face a mask of grief, so complete it didn't even look like her anymore. That's when I noticed the date displayed in the corner of the screen. You know how old camcorders used to do that? Show the date and time in white numbers? October 15th, 2024. 2:17 p.m. I looked at my phone. October 8th, 2024. 7 days away. The tape kept playing. The pastor, Reverend Williams, stepped up to the pulpit. He cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, the same way he always does before a sermon. But when he opened his mouth to speak, there was no sound. The audio cut out completely. His lips moved, people nodded, some wiped their eyes. But I couldn't hear a word. Then the screen went black again. But the tape kept running. I could hear the mechanism spinning in the VCR. After about a minute, text appeared. White letters on black background like those old silent movies. You were warned. That was it. Then static. I rewound the tape and watched it again. Then again, then again. Each time noticing something new, something wrong. Like how everyone in the church was wearing watches, and they all showed different times. Not just a few minutes off. Hours off. Days off. Some of the digital ones showed dates that hadn't happened yet. Others showed dates from years ago. Or how in one shot there were flowers everywhere. Lilies, roses, carnations. But in the next shot they were all dead. Wilted and brown like they'd been there for weeks. Or how some people appeared in multiple places at once. I swear I saw my cousin Beth sitting in the 3rd row, but also standing by the door, but also in the choir loft. All in the same frame. I called Jake. Had to talk to someone, you know. Make sure I wasn't losing my mind. Hey man, what's up? He sounded normal, casual, like the world wasn't tilting off its axis. Jake, this is going to sound crazy, but did you cancel our plans for next weekend? Pause. How did you know? I was just about to call you. My mom's making me go to this thing. Some family obligation. Sorry, dude. What thing? Actually, I don't know. She just said I had to be there, said it was important. My mouth went dry. Is it on the 15th? Yeah, it is. How did you... I hung up. I know that was rude, but I couldn't. I just couldn't. I called my mom next, tried to play it casual. "Hey Mom, quick question. Did you buy any new clothes recently?" "Oh, funny you should ask. I just picked up this lovely dress from Macy's. It was on sale, couldn't resist." "What color?" "Black. You know I don't wear black often, but sometimes you need a good formal dress, right?" "Right. Mom, do you have anything planned for October 15th? She went quiet for a second. "You know, that's strange. I have it marked in my calendar, but I can't remember what for. Just says important, Cedar Rapids. Your father has the same thing. We're actually cutting our Denver trip short to make it back in time." I felt like I was drowning in my own living room, like the air had turned to water and I couldn't breathe. I made some excuse and got off the phone. Then I did something really stupid. I posted about it online, not the whole story. Just asked if anyone else had found weird VHS tapes lately, testing the waters. Within an hour, I had 17 responses, all from people in Cedar Rapids, all describing similar tapes, but different. One guy found a tape of his wedding, but he's never been married. A woman found her daughter's graduation, but her daughter is only 3 years old. Another person found footage of their retirement party, and they just started their first job. All dated within the next year, all showing events that hadn't happened yet. But mine was the only funeral. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw myself in that coffin. So I did what any rational person would do. I started investigating my own death. I searched online for any accidents scheduled for October 15th. Obviously found nothing. Checked the extended weather forecast. Partly cloudy, high of 54. No major storms predicted. Looked up any scheduled construction, events, anything that might be dangerous. Nothing. Then I remembered something. The tape had shown the inside of the church, but not how I died. What if that was a clue? What if I was supposed to figure it out? I drove to the church at about 2 a.m. I know, creepy, right? But I had to see something. The parking lot was empty, lit by a single streetlight that flickered like it was about to die. I walked around the building looking for, I don't know what, signs, warnings, answers. That's when I saw it. In the basement window, a light, just a faint glow, like a TV screen. The door was unlocked. It shouldn't have been, but it was. I went inside, down the stairs I'd walked 100 times for Sunday school and potlucks and AA meetings my uncle made me drive him to. The basement was dark except for that glow, coming from the last room on the left. The old youth group room. Inside, there was a TV, one of those ancient ones on a rolling cart, and a VCR, and scattered on the floor. Dozens of VHS tapes, all with different dates, all with different handwriting. But the TV was playing something. Security footage, it looked like. Of this room, of right now. I could see myself on the screen, standing there, looking at the screen where I could see myself standing there, looking at the screen, and behind me, in the footage, someone was standing in the doorway. I spun around. Nobody there. On the screen, the figure was still there, standing right where I was looking, but in real life, nothing. I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I ran like a scared kid, up the stairs, out the door, to my car. Drove home doing 60 and a 30 and didn't care if I got pulled over. The next 3 days were a blur of paranoia and research. I called in sick to work. Couldn't focus on insurance claims when I might be filing my own death certificate soon. Instead, I tried to find patterns, connections, anything that made sense. I reached out to the other people who'd found tapes. We met at a Denny's on the edge of town. Figured a public place was safer. There were 5 of us. Me, Margaret, the woman with the graduation tape, Dennis, the wedding guy, Amy, retirement party, and Luis, who'd found a tape of his own baptism, even though he was Jewish. "So, what do we have in common?" Margaret asked, stirring her coffee with shaking hands. She was maybe 45, graying hair. The kind of face that looked like it smiled a lot, but hadn't in days. We compared notes, different ages, different jobs, different parts of town. No shared friends or family, never all been in the same place at the same time, until now. "Wait," Dennis said suddenly. He was young, maybe 22, wearing a Hawkeye's hoodie. "What about that storm? 5 years ago, the tornado?" We all remembered it. F3 tornado, touched down near the airport, carved a path right through town, but none of us were hurt. We'd all been lucky. Margaret was in her basement, Dennis at his girlfriend's house on the other side of town. I was at work, in a building that barely got scratched. "So, we all survived," Amy said. She was older, maybe 60, wearing a cross necklace she kept touching nervously. "But what does that mean?" Luis pulled out his phone, started typing frantically. "There were 17 responses to your post," he said to me. 17 people with tapes. You know how many people died in that tornado? We all waited. 17. The silence that followed was heavy, like the air before a storm. "You're saying we were supposed to die?" Margaret whispered. "I'm saying maybe we did," Luis replied. "In some other version, timeline, whatever you want to call it. It sounded insane, but the tapes were insane. Everything about this was insane." That's when Dennis pointed to the TV above the bar. The news was on, sound muted, but the headline was clear. "Local medium claims to predict future deaths." The photo they showed was of a woman I'd never seen before. Elderly, wild white hair, wearing too many scarves, living in a trailer park on Route 30. But what caught my attention was the video footage behind her interview. Grainy, handheld, people holding VHS tapes. We left money on the table and drove out there together, like some weird supernatural carpool. Nobody talked much. What was there to say? The trailer park was exactly what you'd expect. Rundown, forgotten, the kind of place people end up when they've run out of other options. The woman's trailer was at the back, painted purple with wind chimes made of bones hanging from the awning. "I really wish I was making that up," she answered before we knocked. 17 becomes none, or none becomes 17, she said, opening the door. Her eyes were milky with cataracts, but somehow I felt like she could see right through me. "You found the tapes. Did you make them?" I asked. She laughed, sounded like grinding glass. "Nobody makes them. They just are. Always have been, always will be. Playing out every possibility, every path not taken." She gestured for us to come in. The inside smelled like cat pee and incense. "But why are we seeing them now?" Margaret demanded. The woman settled into a recliner that had seen better decades. "Because the veil is thin. Because October is hungry. Because 17 died and 17 lived, and the universe doesn't like untidy books." "That doesn't mean anything," Dennis practically shouted. "Doesn't it?" She turned those cloudy eyes on him. "You were in that blue Honda, weren't you? 5 years ago, driving to Ashley's house. You turned left on Maple Street instead of right on Oak." Dennis went pale. "How do you—" "Because, in another world, you turned right. And the tornado took you at the intersection of Oak and 3rd, just like it took all of them. But here you turned left, 1 second, 1 choice, 17 times over." "So, the tapes," I started, "are showing you what must be," she finished, "to balance the scales. 17 lived who should have died. Now 17 must die who should have lived." "That's murder," Amy gasped. "That's mathematics," the woman corrected. "The universe is very good at mathematics." We left without another word. What else could we do? Outside, Luis was the first to speak. "She's insane. The tapes are real," Margaret countered. "So what do we do?" Dennis asked. "Just wait to die?" I thought about my parents. About Jake, about everyone at that funeral, grieving for me. No, I said. We figure out how to break the pattern. But even as I said it, I noticed something. Dennis kept checking his phone. Amy was looking at her watch. Margaret was staring at the sky like she was waiting for something. "What day is it?" I asked suddenly. "October 11th, Luis answered. Then his face changed. "Oh God, your tape, it's in 4 days." 4 days. And I'd just realized something else. In the funeral footage, there had been 17 people in the front row. 17 exactly. I'd counted them over and over, thinking it was family. But now... "We're all going to be at my funeral," I said quietly. "All 17 of us." The next 3 days, things got worse. Not dramatically. That's what made it so terrifying. Just little things, wrong things. My reflection started lagging, just by a fraction of a second, but enough to notice. I'd turn my head, and in the mirror, I'd catch myself still looking forward for just a moment too long. Food tasted wrong. Not bad, just off. Like someone had switched salt for sugar but only used a grain of each. And the calls, everyone I knew started calling me. Old friends, distant relatives, people I hadn't talked to in years. All just wanting to check in or catch up or say they'd been thinking about me, like they knew something was coming. I met with the others every day. We tried everything. Dennis attempted to leave town. His car broke down at the city limits. Margaret booked a flight. The airline called to say there'd been a system error and no flights were available. Luis tried to destroy his tape. It reappeared in his VCR the next morning, completely intact. October 14th, the day before my funeral. 1 day left. I couldn't take it anymore. I went back to the church at midnight. Not to the basement this time, to the sanctuary. I sat in the exact spot where the coffin would be. Tried to feel something. Anything. A cold spot, a presence, some sign of what was coming. Nothing. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, measured, coming up the aisle behind me. I turned around. It was Reverend Williams. But something was wrong with his face. It kept shifting, like it couldn't decide what expression to wear. "You're early," he said. "For what?" "Your funeral. Though I suppose punctuality won't matter much longer." He sat down in the front pew, his movements too fluid, like his joints bent in ways they shouldn't. "Do you know what death is, son? The end? The beginning, the middle, the margin note in reality's textbook." He smiled, and for a second, I swear his mouth had too many teeth. "You died 5 years ago. You all did. This has been borrowed time. A clerical error in the cosmic filing system. We're alive," I insisted. "Are you? Have you felt alive these past 5 years? Really alive? Or have you felt like you're watching someone else's life through frosted glass?" He was right. God help me, he was right. Ever since the tornado, everything had felt distant, muted, like I was going through the motions, but not really there. "Tomorrow, the error gets corrected," he continued. 17 souls return to their proper place. And if we refuse, he laughed. It echoed wrong, like it was coming from everywhere at once. "You can't refuse gravity. You can't refuse mathematics. You can't refuse death when it's already happened." He stood up, walked to the altar, then turned back to me. "Your parents will give a beautiful eulogy. Your mother will mention how you always helped with the groceries. Your father will cry when he talks about teaching you to ride a bike. Jake will tell the story about the time you two got lost in Colorado and laughed about it the whole way home." "How do you know that?" "Because it's already happened, is happening, will happen. Time isn't a line, son. It's a snake eating its own tail. And tomorrow you're the part that gets swallowed." He walked past me toward the door, but as he passed, he whispered something that made my blood freeze. "Check your pulse." I put my fingers to my wrist, felt around, nothing. Checked my neck, nothing. But I was breathing, I was thinking, The church bells started ringing, 13 times. It was 12:47 a.m. October 15th had begun. I ran home, called the others. We agreed to meet at Margaret's house. Strength in numbers, we figured. But as I was getting in my car, I saw something that stopped me cold. My reflection in the car window was wearing my navy suit. I'm at Margaret's now. We're all here, all 17 of us. And we've discovered something. The tapes have changed. Each one now shows the same thing, the same scene. All of us sitting in Margaret's living room right now at this exact moment. But in the tapes, we're not moving, we're not breathing, we're just sitting here perfectly still, like someone hit pause on reality. And in the corner of each tape, a countdown. Numbers ticking backward, 3, 1742, 3, 1741, 3, 1740. It started at 24 hours. October 15th, 2:17 p.m. The exact time my funeral was supposed to start. Dennis is crying, Amy is praying, Louise is still trying to find a logical explanation. Margaret is holding her granddaughter's photo. And me, I'm recording this. Because someone should know. Someone should remember that we existed, that we tried to fight it. The countdown is at 2:44:17 now. Wait. Something's happening. The tapes just went static, all of them at once. And now they're showing something new. It's us, but not here. We're in the church, all 17 of us, standing in a circle around my coffin. But the coffin is empty, and we're all smiling. But it's not. It's not a happy smile. It's the smile of something that's wearing a human face but doesn't quite know how they work. Margaret just gasped. In the tape, she's holding something. We all are. VHS tapes. We're holding VHS tapes. And one by one, we're placing them in the coffin. No. Wait, we're not placing them. We're climbing in. One by one, we're climbing into the coffin, and it's not getting full. It just keeps accepting us. Like it's bigger on the inside, like it goes down forever. The countdown says 2 hours, 1 minute, and 33 seconds. I can hear church bells. But there's no church near Margaret's house. My phone is ringing. It's Jake. All our phones are ringing. Different people, but I bet I know what they're all saying, that they're on their way, that they'll see us soon, that they're dressed and ready for a funeral. The walls are starting to look thin, like I can almost see through them to something else, another version of this room where we're not here, where we never were. Dennis just tried to leave. He opened the door, but it doesn't lead outside anymore. It leads to the church. I can see the pews, smell the lilies. The countdown says 1 hour, 17 minutes, and 22 seconds. I know how this ends now. We don't die. We never lived. Not these past 5 years. We've been echoes, shadows, glitches in reality's code. And tomorrow, today, in 1 hour and 17 minutes, we get deleted. Or maybe we finally get to rest. The others have stopped fighting it. We're all just sitting here now, watching our countdown tick away, waiting for 2:17 p.m., waiting for our funeral that already happened, is happening, will happen. If you find this, if you find any VHS tapes with dates that haven't happened yet, don't watch them. Or do. It doesn't matter. What's going to happen has already happened. But if you were in Cedar Rapids 5 years ago, if you remember that tornado, count how many people died, and count how many almost died but didn't. And if those numbers don't match, the countdown says 0:32:17. The church bells are getting louder. I can see through the walls now completely. The church is packed. Everyone we know is there. They're all waiting. My mom is in the front row, holding my dad's hand. She's wearing her new black dress. The countdown says 0 hours 5 minutes 43 seconds. I can see myself in the coffin, but I'm also here. I'm both. I'm neither. The tape in the VCR just ejected itself. It's in my hands now. It's warm, like it's alive. The countdown says 0 hours 0 minutes 17 seconds. We're all standing up, moving toward the door that isn't a door anymore. It's just light, warm, white light that smells like lilies and sounds like hymns. The countdown says 0 hours 0 minutes 3 seconds. If you're watching this, if you're listening to this story, check your pulse. Make sure you're really there. Make sure you're really... The countdown says 0 hours 0 minutes 0 seconds. Wait, I'm still here. We're all still here. But something's different. The tapes are gone. The countdown is gone. It's 2:18 p.m. on October 15th, and we're still in Margaret's living room. Dennis just checked his phone. There are 17 news alerts, 17 accidents across Cedar Rapids, 17 deaths. But not us. 17 different people. People we don't know. People who weren't supposed to die today. The old woman was right. The universe is very good at mathematics. 17 for 17. The books are balanced. But now I can't stop thinking. Those 17 people who just died. In 5 years, will they find tapes too? Will they see their own funerals that already happened? Will they sit in someone's living room watching a countdown, waiting to pay a debt they don't remember owing? My phone is buzzing. Text from Jake. Hey man, weird question, but did we have plans today? I have this feeling like I was supposed to be somewhere important, but I can't remember what. I told him no. We didn't have plans. Everything is fine. But I kept one tape, just one, hidden in my apartment, wrapped in an old t-shirt, stuffed in a box I'll never open. It still shows my funeral, still shows everyone I know dressed in black, still shows me in that coffin. The date on it has changed, though. October 15th, 2029. 5 years from now, when the next tornado is supposed to hit. So, if you're watching this, if you're listening to this late at night, trying to fall asleep, pay attention to the storms. Count the survivors. Count the dead. Make sure the numbers match. And if you find a VHS tape with a date that hasn't happened yet, maybe watch it. Maybe don't. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe it already happened. Maybe you're already in the coffin and you just don't know it yet. Sweet dreams. Actually, no. I need to tell you one more thing. The thing that keeps me awake every single night. In my tape, in that original funeral footage, there was a moment I didn't mention. Right at the end, just before it cut to static. The camera turned away from the coffin, did a full 360-degree pan of the church, and in the very back row, in the corner, barely visible, someone was holding a camera, recording, and that someone looked exactly like me. So I have to ask, am I recording this right now because I want to, or because I already did? 5 years from now, will I be standing in the back of my own funeral, filming it, creating the very tape I found? Time isn't a line. It's a snake eating its own tail. And I think I'm the tooth. Subscribe if you want to know what happens in 2029. Comment if you found your own tape. Share if you want others to be warned, or don't. It's already been decided, hasn't it? Story number 3. The lavender sachets appeared first. 3 of them tucked between my folded sweaters in the bedroom dresser. The same hand-stitched ones Dorothy used to make, with those tiny embroidered roses she was so proud of. My husband Tom found me holding one that Tuesday morning, my hands trembling so badly I could barely grip the delicate fabric. "Where did you get that?" His voice came out strangled. "They were just... here." I pressed the sachet to my nose. That distinct smell, dried lavender mixed with something else, something medicinal and old. Tom, these are exactly like the ones your mother used to. Don't! He snatched it from my hand, his face going pale. Just don't. But we both knew, we both remembered. Dorothy had been dead for 37 years. Before you think I'm crazy, before you close this video thinking this is just another ghost story, I need you to understand something. What happened to us in our suburban Minneapolis home last week wasn't supernatural. It was something far worse. Something that makes me check every corner of our house now. Something that has me sleeping with the lights on. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this, but I promise you, after tonight, you'll be checking your own dresser drawers. You'll be wondering about those little things that appear in your home. The things you can't quite explain. Now, let me tell you what really happened when Dorothy came back. It started 3 weeks ago when Tom's cousin Janet called from Duluth. She'd been cleaning out her mother's attic. Tom's Aunt Ruth had passed away in September, and Janet was finally getting around to sorting through everything. "There's a box here labeled for Tom," Janet had said over speakerphone while we were having dinner. "From Dorothy. It's... God, Tom, it looks like it's been up here since the 80s. Tom had set down his fork, his jaw tightening the way it always did when someone mentioned his mother. Their relationship had been complicated. Dorothy had never approved of me, called me that California girl, even though I was from Oregon. Said I was too modern, too independent. She died of a stroke 2 years after we married, and if I'm being honest, our marriage got easier after she was gone. Just throw it away, Tom had said. But Janet insisted on driving down that weekend. 4 hours from Duluth to Minneapolis, carrying a dusty cardboard box that smelled like mothballs and regret. The box sat in our garage for a week before Tom finally opened it. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard him call out, "Sarah, you need to see this." Inside the box were things that made no sense. Recent things. A Minnesota Twins baseball cap from their 2010 season. A program from our daughter Emma's high school graduation in 2015. A photo of our son Michael at his wedding from 2019. "This is impossible," Tom kept saying, turning the items over in his hands. "She died in 1987. She never met our kids. She never..." But there was more. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in tissue paper that crumbled at our touch, was a leather journal. Dorothy's handwriting covered every page. But the dates, the entries started in 1987, the day after she died. October 15th, 1987. They think I'm gone. The funeral was lovely. Tom wore the blue tie I gave him for Christmas. That California girl held his hand the whole time. I wanted to tell them I was still here, but the rules. There are rules now. I have to wait, I have to watch, I have to gather strength. Tom's hands shook as he turned the pages. Entry after entry, documenting our lives. Our children being born, our moves, our struggles, our secrets. May 3rd, 2001, Sarah had another miscarriage. She hasn't told Tom yet. She sits in the bathroom and cries when he's at work. If I could comfort her, but no, not yet. I'm not strong enough yet. I felt ice in my veins. I'd never told anyone about that miscarriage, not even Tom. It had happened so early. I'd convinced myself it didn't count. "This is sick," I said, backing away from the journal. "Someone's playing a horrible joke." But Tom kept reading, his face growing paler with each page. September 8th, 2019. Michael's wedding was beautiful. I stood in the back where the shadows gather. No one saw me, but I was there. I'm always there now. Getting stronger, getting closer. Soon, I'll be strong enough to come home. The last entry was dated a week ago. October 7th, 2024, it's time. The night after we found the journal, things began to change in our house. It started small. The coffee maker, which we'd programmed to start at 6 a.m. for the past 5 years, suddenly began brewing at 5:30. Tom's favorite mug, which he always left by the sink, started appearing in the cupboard, second shelf, turned handle right exactly how Dorothy used to insist was proper. "Maybe we're just stressed," Tom said, but his voice cracked. "Reading that journal, it's messing with our heads." But then came the cooking smells. Thursday morning, I woke to the scent of pot roast. Not just any pot roast, Dorothy's pot roast with that specific combination of thyme and bay leaves she'd guard like a state secret. The smell was so strong, so real, that I actually went downstairs expecting to find someone in our kitchen. It was empty, but the smell lingered for hours. Tom tried to rationalize everything. "Shared psychosis," he said, pulling up articles on his phone. "It's a real thing." We read that journal, and now we're both imagining. The doorbell interrupted him. It was 9 p.m. We weren't expecting anyone. Tom looked through the peephole and stumbled backward, his face draining of color. "There's no one there," he whispered. But the doorbell rang again, and again, and again. 7 times. Exactly 7 times, with exactly 3 seconds between each ring. The same way Dorothy used to ring the doorbell when she'd come for her Sunday visits. We didn't open the door that night. We sat on the couch, holding each other, trying to pretend we didn't hear the soft humming coming from our front porch. That old hymn Dorothy loved. Without the religious words, just the melody, over and over until almost midnight. The next morning there were footprints in the flour. I need to explain. I'd been baking the day before, and some flour had spilled on the kitchen floor. I'd meant to clean it, but forgot. When we came down Friday morning, there were footprints in that flour. Small, delicate footprints in the same pointed shoes Dorothy always wore. They led from the back door to the stove, to the refrigerator, to the kitchen table, where Tom's coffee mug sat, steaming hot, prepared exactly how he liked it. 2 sugars, a splash of cream, a tiny sprinkle of cinnamon on top, something only Dorothy had ever done for him. "Don't drink it," I said. But Tom was already lifting the mug to his lips, tears streaming down his face. "It tastes exactly right," he whispered, "exactly like she used to make it." That's when we heard the knitting needles. Click, 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 coming from the living room. We found the yarn first, a ball of soft yellow wool, the kind Dorothy always used for baby blankets, rolling across the floor as if pulled by invisible hands. The knitting needles lay on her old chair, the one we'd kept in the corner for sentimental reasons, the one no one ever sat in anymore. The chair was rocking, back and forth, and there was an indentation in the cushion, the shape of someone small, someone who weighed maybe 90 pounds, exactly what Dorothy weighed when she died. "Mom?" Tom's voice broke like a child's. "Mom, is that you?" The rocking stopped. The air in the room grew thick, heavy, like breathing through wool. The temperature dropped so fast our breath came out in clouds. And then, just for a moment, just for one impossible moment, we saw her, a shimmer in the air, like heat distortion in reverse. The outline of a small woman, silver hair pinned back, those same pointed shoes, that same disapproving tilt to her head. She was looking right at me. And she smiled, not a warm smile, not a welcoming smile. The smile of someone who'd been planning something for 37 years. That night, we tried to leave, packed our bags, got in the car, decided to stay at a hotel until we could figure out what was happening. Tom turned the key in the ignition. Nothing. The car was dead. Not just the battery, everything. As if every electrical component had been drained. Tom's phone, dead. My phone, dead. The streetlights on our block, all of them mysteriously out, except for our house. Every light in our house was on, blazing bright against the darkness, and in the living room window, silhouetted against the curtains, was the shape of someone small, someone watching, someone waiting. We had no choice but to go back inside. The house felt different now, charged, like the air before a thunderstorm. Pictures on the walls had been rearranged. All our family photos were gone, replaced by photos of Dorothy. Dorothy as a young woman. Dorothy with Tom as a baby. Dorothy alone, always alone, staring out from every frame with those calculating eyes. In the kitchen, dinner was cooking. A full pot roast, complete with vegetables, simmering on the stove. The table was set for 3, the good china. Dorothy's china, which we'd packed away in the attic years ago. 3-place settings, with the napkins folded into perfect triangles the way she'd always insisted was proper. "We should eat," Tom said, his voice hollow. She always hated when food went to waste. "Tom, no. This isn't right. Your mother is dead, whatever this is. Then explain it." He was shouting now, tears streaming down his face. "Explain any of this, the journal, the footprints, the cooking. If she's dead, then what?" The lights went out. All of them, all at once, plunging us into complete darkness. And in that darkness we heard her voice. Not a recording, not an echo. Her actual voice as clear as if she were standing right beside us. 37 years, she said. 37 years of watching you live in my house. Raise your children where I should have raised mine. Sleeping in my bed, using my kitchen, and never once did you set a place for me at the table. The lights flickered back on. She was sitting at the head of the table. Not a shimmer this time. Not an outline. Dorothy, solid and real as she'd been in life, wearing the same green dress we'd buried her in. Her skin was pale, translucent, like rice paper stretched over bone. But her eyes were bright and sharp, and terribly, terribly alive. "Sit," she said. "We're going to have dinner as a family." The way it should have been. Tom moved like a sleepwalker, taking his old place at her right hand. I remained frozen by the stove. "Sarah." Her voice was sweet now, motherly. "Don't make me ask twice." I sat. She served us, her movements precise and practiced. The pot roast steamed on our plates, looking perfect, smelling incredible. But there was something underneath the savory aroma. Something chemical, something wrong. "Eat," Dorothy commanded. Tom lifted his fork. I grabbed his wrist. "Don't," I whispered. Dorothy's eyes flashed. "You always were too controlling, always keeping him from his family, from his obligations." "My obligation is to my wife," Tom said quietly. The temperature dropped 20 degrees. "Your obligation," Dorothy said, her voice now sharp as winter, "is to your mother. The woman who gave you life, the woman who sacrificed everything for you. You died," Tom said. "You had a stroke. We buried you." Dorothy laughed, a sound like wind through empty rooms. "Death," she said, "is just a change of address. And I've decided to move back home." The pot roast on our plates began to rot. In seconds it went from perfectly cooked to putrid, maggots writhing through the meat. The smell hit us like a physical force. Decay, formaldehyde, earth. "This is what you've been feeding me," Dorothy said. "Neglect, abandonment, letting me rot in the ground while you played happy family. Well, no more." She stood, and as she did, the house began to shake. Pictures fell from walls, dishes rattled in cupboards, and from somewhere far away, or maybe from everywhere at once, came the sound of dirt being disturbed, of something climbing up, up, up from deep underground. "You want to know the truth?" Dorothy asked, moving closer to us. She leaned in and I could smell her breath. Mothballs and old roses and something else, something chemical and sharp. "I never left," she whispered. "The stroke only killed my body. But rage keeps you anchored. Rage gives you strength. And 37 years of rage? Well," she smiled that terrible smile again. "That's enough to make you solid." What happened next? I still have trouble believing it myself. Tom stood up, facing his mother for the first time in 37 years, really facing her. "You're right," he said. "I was a terrible son." Dorothy's smile widened. "But you," Tom continued, "were a terrible mother." The smile vanished. "You controlled every aspect of my life. Chose my clothes, my friends, my college. You sabotaged every relationship I had before Sarah. You made me feel guilty for every moment of happiness that didn't center around you." "I loved you," Dorothy shrieked, and the windows rattled. "You consumed me," Tom corrected. "There's a difference." Dorothy's form began to flicker, like a TV with bad reception. "And the truth is," Tom said, stepping closer to her, "you're not here because of rage. You're here because you can't let go. You can't accept that I chose my own life, that I chose Sarah, that I chose to be happy without you. You ungrateful—" "I'm grateful," Tom interrupted. "Grateful for the good times. The bedtime stories, the birthday cakes. But I'm also grateful you died when you did, because if you hadn't, I never would have had the courage to actually live." Dorothy lunged at him, or tried to, but her form was dissolving now, becoming transparent again. The house stopped shaking. The lights stopped flickering. "This isn't over," she hissed, her voice fading like a radio station going out of range. "I'm still here. I'll always be here. In every corner, in every shadow, every time you feel guilty, every time you doubt, every time you wonder if you're a good son, I'll be there." "I know," Tom said softly, "but you'll just be a memory. And memories only have the power we give them." Dorothy's form burst apart like smoke in wind. The pot roast vanished. The china disappeared. The photos on the walls returned to normal. And in the suddenly quiet house, Tom and I stood alone, holding each other, shaking. But it wasn't over. Not entirely. The next morning, we found one last entry in Dorothy's journal. Fresh ink, still wet, in handwriting that was both hers and not hers. October 11th, 2024. "They think I'm gone again. But a mother's love never dies. It just learns. It adapts. It finds new ways in. Watch for the lavender sachets. Check your dresser drawers. Look for the things that appear where they shouldn't be. The coffee brewing at the wrong time. The comfort foods you didn't cook. I'm not the only one who learned to come back. We're all here. All the mothers who loved too much. All the mothers who couldn't let go. We share recipes now in the spaces between life and death. We trade tips on manifestation. We support each other in our returns. Your mother-in-law might be gone, Sarah, but your mother... When did you last call your mother? When did you last visit her grave? Think about it. We'll be waiting." I called my mom that day. She answered on the third ring, sounding perfectly normal, perfectly alive. We talked for an hour about nothing important, but just before she hung up, she said something that made my blood run cold. "I've been making friends with Dorothy, you know. She's teaching me the most interesting things." "Mom, what are you talking about?" "Oh, nothing, dear, just mother things. You'll understand someday, when it's your turn. The line went dead, that was a week ago. Since then, I've been finding things, little things. My mom's reading glasses on my nightstand. She lives 3 states away. Her lipstick in my purse, a shade she wore in the 90s. And this morning, there were 2 balls of yarn in Dorothy's chair, yellow and blue, 2 sets of knitting needles, and 2 indentations in the cushion. But it didn't stop there. Yesterday, our neighbor Mrs. Henderson knocked on our door, her face pale and drawn. She clutched a casserole dish in her hands, the same green bean recipe her mother-in-law used to make. The same mother-in-law who had died 15 years ago. "It was just sitting on my counter this morning," she whispered. "Still warm." And there were footprints in my kitchen. Small ones. In those old orthopedic shoes Gladys always wore. Tom and I exchanged glances. We invited Mrs. Henderson in, made her tea, and listened as she described the same progression we'd experienced. Small things at first. Familiar smells, objects in wrong places. Then the appearances, the conversations, the demands. "She wants me to move back to the old house," Mrs. Henderson said, her hands shaking around her teacup. "The one where she lived. Where she died, says it's only proper, says a daughter-in-law should honor her husband's mother's memory." That evening, we started getting calls, Tom's cousin Janet from Duluth, her voice tight with panic. She'd found her mother's jewelry box on her kitchen table, playing that old music box tune Ruth used to hum. The same Ruth who'd supposedly died in September. "But here's the thing," Janet said. "I was at the funeral. I watched them lower the coffin. I threw dirt on the grave. So how is she leaving me notes in my own handwriting, telling me how disappointed she is that I donated her clothes to Goodwill?" Then came the call from my sister in Portland. My mother had been dead for 3 years, but apparently she'd been visiting Linda's dreams, teaching her new recipes, showing her where to find old family heirlooms, leaving suggestions about how Linda should raise her children. "She says she's been watching," Linda whispered into the phone. "Says she has friends now, a whole network of mothers who came back. They share information. They help each other find their families again." I started researching online, diving deep into forums and message boards. What I found made my blood run cold. There were hundreds of us, thousands maybe. All across the country, people were reporting similar experiences. Dead mothers and mother-in-laws returning. Not randomly, not haphazardly. With purpose, with coordination. The pattern was always the same. A recently deceased relative clearing out an old house. A box or container that had been stored for years, sometimes decades. Personal effects that shouldn't exist. And then, the manifestations. One woman in Texas found her mother-in-law's wedding ring in her cereal box. Another in Maine discovered her mother's knitting needles clicking away in an empty room. A man in Oregon came home to find his deceased mother's signature casserole cooling on his counter, even though he'd been at work all day. But the most chilling posts were from the children. Adult children who described their dead mothers appearing at family gatherings they hadn't been invited to. Standing in the back of graduation ceremonies. Sitting in hospital waiting rooms during births. Always watching. Always judging. Always finding ways to insert themselves back into lives they'd left behind. There was a pattern to their methods, too. They started with small manipulations. Rearranging household items. Cooking familiar foods. Playing with electronics. Building up their strength, their presence, until they could maintain a physical form for longer periods. And they were learning from each other. One post, from a user called SorryDaughter88, described finding a handwritten recipe card that wasn't quite in her mother's handwriting. The recipe was for manifestation bread, with ingredients like 3 cups of regret, a tablespoon of unspoken words, and a pinch of unfinished business. The instructions were equally bizarre. Knead until guilt rises. Bake at the temperature of a mother's love serves one ungrateful child. Below the recipe, in different handwriting, were notes from other mothers. Tips on how to make coffee taste like disappointment. Instructions for folding laundry in ways that communicated displeasure. Techniques for making a house feel watched, even when you're alone. They were sharing knowledge, perfecting their craft, building a network of maternal persistence that transcended death itself. Tom found me at 3 a.m., hunched over my laptop, scrolling through post after post of similar experiences. My eyes burned from staring at the screen, but I couldn't stop reading. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Research," I said. "Tom, this isn't just about Dorothy. This isn't just about us. There's something bigger happening here." I showed him the forum posts, the patterns, the similarities. His face grew paler with each story. "It's like they're organized," he said finally. "They are organized. Look at this." I pulled up a post from just hours ago. A woman in Michigan describing how her mother-in-law had appeared with specific information about her grandson's school performance. Information that the mother-in-law couldn't possibly have known unless someone had told her. Someone else who was watching. Someone else who was reporting back. "They're creating a network," I said. "Dead mothers sharing intelligence about their living families, coordinating their returns, supporting each other's manifestations." Tom sat heavily in the chair beside me. "So, what do we do?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I think we need to warn people. The patterns are there, the signs. If we can help people recognize what's happening before it gets as far as it did with us." That's when my phone rang. At 3:47 a.m. The caller ID showed my mother's name. My mother, who had been dead for 3 years. With trembling fingers, I answered. "Hello, sweetheart," came her voice, clear as if she were sitting right beside me. "I heard you've been doing research. Learning about our little network, how wonderful. You always were the curious one." "Mom?" My voice came out as a whisper. "Dorothy told me how well you handled her visit. She's quite impressed, you know. She said you have potential, the kind of strength it takes to persist, to push through barriers, to find ways back when the time comes." "What are you talking about?" My mother laughed, the same warm laugh I remembered from childhood, but with something cold underneath it now. "Oh, darling, don't you see? We're not just coming back for our children. We're recruiting, building our ranks. Every mother who dies with unfinished business, every mother who dies worrying about her children, every mother who dies feeling like her job isn't done, we're finding them, teaching them, showing them the way." The line crackled with static, but through it, I could hear other voices. Distant, overlapping. Dozens of women talking, planning, coordinating. "And you, my dear Sarah, you're going to be such a wonderful addition to our network. When your time comes, when Emma and Michael need you, when their children need their grandmother." "I'm not dead," I said. "Not yet," my mother agreed. "But death is just a transition, sweetheart. And we'll be waiting for you, all of us, ready to teach you everything we've learned." The call ended. I sat staring at the phone, my hands shaking. Tom was watching me, his face white with terror. "Sarah," he said quietly, "what did she mean about Emma and Michael needing you?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text message. From Emma, our daughter, who lived 2 states away with her husband and twin toddlers. "Mom, the strangest thing happened today. I found Grandma Dorothy's recipe cards in my kitchen. The ones you said were lost when she died, and there's one I've never seen before. It's addressed to me, in her handwriting. But Mom, it's dated next week." Tom and I stared at each other in horror. Dorothy wasn't gone. None of them were gone. They were just getting started. Tom says I'm being paranoid, says we've been through trauma and I'm projecting. But he started checking the dresser drawers too. Started monitoring when the coffee maker turns on. Started counting the rings when the doorbell chimes. Because here's the thing about mothers, they never really leave. They just wait. In the corners of our guilt, in the spaces of our doubt, in the moments when we wonder if we're good enough children. And sometimes when the conditions are right, when the rage or love or loneliness gets strong enough, they find a way back. So let me ask you something, and really think before you answer. When was the last time something appeared in your house that you couldn't explain? A familiar smell from childhood, an object in the wrong place, a meal you didn't remember cooking. Check your dresser drawers tonight. Count the lavender sachets. Watch for the signs. Because Dorothy was wrong about one thing. It's not just mothers who can come back. It's anyone who loved too much to let go. Anyone who died with unfinished business. Anyone or anything that believes it has a claim on the living. Sweet dreams. Oh, and if you're still watching, if this story kept you listening until the end, subscribe to the channel. Share it with someone who needs to check their dresser drawers. Leave a comment about the strange things you found in your home. Because I need to know I'm not alone in this. I need to know others are watching too. Others are waiting. Others are preparing. For when they come back. All of them. Click, click, click. Do you hear that? The knitting needles? They're coming from your room now. Better go check before it's too late. And if you find something that shouldn't be there, remember what my mother said. They're always recruiting. Always looking for the next generation. Always preparing for the day when you'll need them. When you'll join them. When you'll learn that a mother's love truly never dies. Click, 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 click. Now, sleep. Or at least try to. It's quiet now, too quiet, but not empty. That feeling crawling up your spine, that weight pressing on your chest, that's not your imagination. You're not alone. There's something behind the curtain. You haven't looked, not because you forgot, but because you're afraid to know. You heard the whisper, soft where wet, wrong. Like breath dragged across broken glass. But you told yourself it was the wind, didn't you? That lie made you feel safe. Temporarily. Let me ask you. Does the wind whisper your name? Does the wind tap lightly, again and again, from the same spot, behind the curtain, every night? Does the wind leave scratches on your window that weren't there this morning? Thin, sharp, like claws, like warnings. You don't remember opening the window. You never open the window. But it's unlocked now. You could check, you could stand up, you could walk over and pull the curtain back. But you won't. Because you know. You know what's waiting, not because you've seen it, but because you felt it. In the quiet, in the dark. Every time you close your eyes, every time you wake up and your blanket is just slightly moved. Your door slightly cracked. You try to explain it. Your mind wants to explain it. But that whisper, that sound that only comes when you're alone, when everything is still, when the night is at its deepest, that's not a dream, that's a presence. It doesn't want your fear, it wants your attention. It feeds on the moment you doubt yourself. The second you wonder if you heard something, the instant your heart rate rises. That's when it leans closer. It's been patient, watching, learning you like prey. You ever notice it never shows up when the lights are on, when someone's in the room? It waits for the ritual, the brushing of your teeth, the turning off of lights, the last look at your phone, the deep breath just before sleep. That's when it wakes up, that's when it stirs behind the curtain. Sometimes it watches you all night. Sometimes it moves. A shift in the shadow. A faint creak on the floorboards. The sound of fabric sliding over skin. And when you don't check, when you ignore it, that's when it comes closer. Not fast, not loud, just closer. You might feel a cold spot on the bed. You might feel breath on your neck. You might hear a whisper in your ear that sounds almost like your voice. It copies, it mimics, it blends, not to confuse you, to prepare you, Because soon, it won't need the curtain, it won't need shadows, it will sit beside you, stand behind you, speak through you. You won't even know when it happens. You'll wake up, look in the mirror, and something will be off. Your eyes won't blink quite right, your smile will linger too long. Your reflection will move just a little after you do. And the people around you? They'll say you seem different. Not worse, just not you. But tonight you're still you. Still in control, for now. You could still check. You could still confront it. Pull the curtain back, face it, but deep down, you've already made your choice. You won't. Because you'd rather lie still, let your eyes drift shut, and hope sleep comes quickly. And it will. But what you wake up as might not be the same. Now, if you've made it this far, congratulations. You're not just a viewer, you're part of something bigger. Something that watches with you, that sits beside you as you watch, as you listen, as you wait. Because this story doesn't end when the screen fades to black. It follows you into the next room, into your dreams, into your reflection. If you liked this story, like, share, and subscribe, so you don't miss the next one, so we don't miss you. And comment below. Tell us the moment you stopped feeling alone. We're watching, we're listening, and we read everything. Now, go ahead, gain the courage to check the dark corners before you sleep. Turn off the lights, close your eyes, sleep well, if you can.